It is your Tuesday daily delivery. I am Michael Rand. Glad to be back for another day and hope everybody out there is having a great one as well. Beautiful day outside. Get outside for a while. Take me with you. Take me with you in your AirPods, whatever your listening device is. Go for a walk and get outside. Go for a run. Go for a bike ride. Go do something. Just go sit outside. I don't care what you do. Just get outside. Enjoy the sunshine. These are the days we wait for. These are the days we love. We'll see if it's a day the Twins love. Get to them in a minute. They play at the Yankees tonight. Chris Hine joins me in a little bit to talk Timberwolves, kind of putting a bow on that season. We'll be talking Wolves, I would imagine, for at least a few weeks now until we get to the draft, until we get to free agency. That's one offshoot of, this season going so much deeper than we are used to for the Timberwolves, playing right to the end of May, early June, around there. All this stuff, all the offseason stuff for the Wolves, very close to now, draft and free agency right around the corner. So, not a long time to catch your breath if you're a Wolves fan or a Wolves beat writer like Chris Hine before things crank up again. But I'm sure fans will not mind that, and they would take many subsequent years of that sort of calendar if it meant the Wolves were making deep playoff runs all of those times. An update on the Comcast versus Bally versus Diamond versus MLB versus all the above, the bankruptcy stuff going on with Diamond Sports. Just thought I would kind of provide whatever context I can for where things at and how I see it. It's not great news right now, but it's something I keep getting asked about. So let's do an update today, since there is something on the calendar today with that. And the Timberwolves, Micah Nori, interesting nugget on him. Reportedly, a candidate will be interviewed for Cleveland's head coaching vacancy out in Cleveland. So, could the Wolves be losing their top assistant under Chris Finch? First, though, what I miss, like I said, we're going to start at the top with Justin Jefferson and the Vikings. Now, agrees to the largest non-quarterback contract right now in terms of overall, or in terms of yearly value in the NFL. $35 million a year, 4 years, $140 million, $110 guaranteed. This has been a long time in the works, right? It's been a long time in the works. Almost a year, it feels like, that these negotiations have been going on. Almost got done right at the start of last season, but they shelved it, tabled it, said, not quite ready, don't have to do this yet. So then the season plays out. Justin Jefferson gets hurt. He's got that hamstring problem, misses a bunch of games. Vikings do pretty well without him. It was a weird year last year. I think they were 2-8 when Justin Jefferson played, 5-2 when he didn't play. Very weird stat there, because obviously he is one of their best players, probably their best player. And you would not expect that to be the case, but just kind of happened. That was the part of their season where there was more winnable games, things like that. You had some overperformance by some other players. So you had that weird year. And then you get into this offseason, you start to hear some rumblings, right? Like around the draft, leading up to the draft. Oh, are the Vikings going to trade Justin Jefferson? Could they get a whole bunch of picks back? Is this how they get out of the box when it comes to how they're going to get their quarterback of the future? And then it turns out they don't have to mortgage the future to get J.J. McCarthy. He kind of falls a little bit further than we might have thought. They get him at number 10 overall, don't have to even give up another first-round pick to go get their quarterback, don't have to make that huge sweeping trade up. Listen, though, to me, it never made sense to trade Justin Jefferson. It was an interesting thought experiment. And I know we talked about it on this show. I know we talked about it on Access Vikings. Like, what would a trade look like? How would the Vikings think about approaching a deal like that? But every time you started to talk about it, it was like, yeah, but then you don't have Justin Jefferson. And there's a difference, right? There's a difference when you're talking about trading a really good player and trading a generational Hall of Fame trajectory talent like Justin Jefferson. To me, it's the difference between, like, when the Vikings traded Stephon Diggs, which, if we're remembering correctly, led to the drafting of Justin Jefferson. The pick they got back, the first-round pick they got back from Buffalo in the Stephon Diggs trade they used directly to take Justin Jefferson. But Stephon Diggs was always, in the time that he was with the Vikings, he was always like a top 10, top 15 wide receiver, an excellent wide receiver, very good player, fit their system, fit their scheme, things like that. But he was not a Hall of Fame player. He was a very good player. It was hard to watch him go, and then they traded him. Justin Jefferson comes right in, starts doing Justin Jefferson things almost immediately, and you're like, okay, that was a great trade. You trade Justin Jefferson, who has more receiving yards than anybody else in history in his first 4 seasons. He's averaging almost 100 yards per game for his career in the first 4 seasons. Missed 7 games last year and still has put up all these ridiculous numbers, things like that. He is on a path right now where if he keeps playing at this pace for another 5 to 7 years, he will be in Canton, Ohio someday. He will be a Hall of Fame receiver. So what the Vikings did is they get the next 4 years of that player. They've already had the first 4 years, establishing a Hall of Fame path. Justin Jefferson right now on a Hall of Fame path. Now they get the next 4 years, which should be prime Justin Jefferson years, the mid to late 20s. You should not see any sort of meaningful physical decline. He should still be at the peak or very, very, very near the peak of his physical abilities all throughout the life of the contract. His mental acuity will be right there. He will be extremely sharp, extremely good during these 4 years. So you've guaranteed yourself 4 more years of the best wide receiver in football, maybe the best non-quarterback in football. He's being paid like that, being paid accordingly, but that is fair market value for how good he is. So you get that. That's what you get. Now, imagine if you had traded. Imagine thinking about him going somewhere else. It's kind of like imagining trading Anthony Edwards right now, an ascending talent who is only probably going to get better or is at least going to stay at this high peak for a long time. You couldn't even conceive of that right now. That is Justin Jefferson. I know he doesn't play quarterback. I know quarterback is the premium position in the NFL, but imagining him not being on the Vikings just never made sense, even if the draft capital would have been great. So it made sense in the end for them to get something done. It feels like the term is right. Feels like he got everything he wanted. The Vikings got what they wanted. It's a win-win deal, and now everybody can just relax, and J.J. McCarthy can go throw the ball to Justin Jefferson. Like I said, at the jump, Twins play the Yankees. That is in New York. Not going to belabor the history of that series over the past, 2 decades or so, but there was a stat when the Twins played the Yankees last month that the Twins and Yankees in their last 162 games, including the postseason, the Yankees were 1-18-44 against the Twins. That is just a mind-boggling stat. 1-18-44 shows you exactly how lopsided this has been. And I just wanted to point out, too, that when the Twins were going great last month, it was that series at Target Field against the Yankees that stopped them in their tracks. They lost all 3 games of the Yankees. They got swept there. They lost 4 more on the road. It was 45-12 over the span of 7 games after that huge stretch where they'd been playing well. Turned it around after that. They've won 9 out of 12 since then. This kind of up-down, up-down, up-down season to be 33-26 right now. But so the Twins in that spot, can they avoid another slide started by the Yankees? Because this started with the Yankees a few weeks ago when they played them. Can they avoid that? It's the Yankees, then at Pittsburgh, then a 10-game homestand after that. So if you can just kind of tread water on this road trip, you might get some tough pitching matchups in Pittsburgh, like Royce and I talked about yesterday. But can you hold serve on this road trip? Start playing at least okay, even if you're not playing great, and then take advantage of that long homestand. We will see. It's not been great against the Yankees. We know that, but can they be a little bit better? And before we get to Chris Hine and a little Timberwolves talk, a hearing today in bankruptcy court. It's the latest kind of discovery, kind of chance for all sides to kind of give a progress report on where this bankruptcy stuff is headed between Diamond Sports, its creditors. Major League Baseball will be represented. NBA, NHL lawyers, I'm sure, will be there. If you remember the last time they had one of these hearings, it was last month. Basically, it was the lawyers from all these leagues basically yelling at Diamond Sports saying, get your act together, we're running out of time, things like that. Well, since then, I missed this in the whole lead up to the last couple weeks, been busy, Timberwolves in the playoffs, moving, things like that. I missed this, but they moved the confirmation hearing of the Diamond Sports restructuring plan, it was going to be June 18th. We were all looking at that date 2 weeks out where we're going to get some resolution. What's going to happen here? They moved that to the end of July. So that plan confirmation hearing is now on the docket to the end of July. So that's 6 weeks further out. So whatever clarity we're going to get on this is now pushed 6 weeks deeper into the future. And what that means is if you were hoping that there might be some resolution to the deal with with Comcast and them having a problem not having Bally Sports North and all these other Bally channels owned by Diamond on Comcast right now, Xfinity, that doesn't seem like that's going to get resolved anytime soon because there's been no movement on that. It's been over a month since Comcast customers lost access to those channels. It's been over a month. I don't see any relief in sight on that, especially now that this date has been pushed back. Could just be a holding pattern. So if you've got Comcast and you're trying to watch the Twins right now, I don't think it's great news right now, especially with this confirmation being pushed back. But we'll see what comes of the hearing today. I believe it's scheduled for later this morning, I think 11 a.m. The local time there. So we will see what comes of that. We'll probably listen in on that and see if anything interesting comes of that. But that is the status of where things are at right now. Again, it's kind of more of a wait and see. We've been wait and see for a long time, and it's not been good for the consumer.
Once more, before we give him a well-earned break, I hope he's going somewhere nice because he's not going to have to cover the NBA Finals anymore. Kind of a bummer with the way it ended because it sure looked like the Finals could be a possibility. But I also imagine, Chris Hine, that you, now that it's here and now that, once this really kicks in, you might enjoy a little bit of time off here.
It took me all of 24 hours to start making travel plans and booking flights and hotels and this and that. And it's a shortened window, though. I mean, listen, the draft and free agency are 3 weeks away.
That's true.
So there's not much time before we're going to be talking, heavy Timberwolves news again once the end of June, beginning of July rolls around here. So. I had to book my trip to, let's just call it an island country in the water somewhere.
Hope it's not in the water.
Well, I mean, I'll be spending plenty of time in the water. Let's just put it that way.
Yes.
And I'm also going to reintroduce myself to my family back home in Pennsylvania.
Nice. Yep.
They haven't seen me since Christmas, so I think they'd like to see my face. So we're going to do both things in the coming weeks here.
You're right, though. It is when you make a playoff run, which the Timberwolves hadn't done for 20 years, you do condense your offseason. And it's a good point. Like the draft and free agency will be here in a few weeks, quicker than we might imagine. And the Wolves have, a couple of top 40 picks, 27 and 37. They've got free agency decisions to make. They've got salary cap questions, luxury tax questions, and, questions of just how much or all of the key components to this Western Conference Finals team will be on the roster next year. As you kind of frame it up, how do you see this offseason, likely playing out, or what are the biggest questions that you think they still need to resolve?
Yeah, I think obviously we don't, have an idea on, well, we have an idea, but we don't know for sure whether, this whole core is going to be back kind of intact. We seem it's all things are heading in that direction, right?
Yep.
That ownership is, really whichever side it is, ownership is really happy with kind of what happened this year. They want to keep it together. They want to, potentially pay the hefty tax bill that's going to come their way to try and make another run at this. That's what Tim Connolly, that's how he likes to operate. He's not he likes to let things kind of marinate and develop the way he did in Denver when he feels like he's got a contending team and he feels like he has a contending team. So I think it's shaping up they're going to try to run this back as much as possible. And hope that everybody's a year older. Anthony Edwards is a year older, a year smarter, a year more experienced, that this run will help propel him. And even players like, Jaden McDaniels and Naz Reid get a year of experience under their belts, maybe a little more consistent in the playoffs next year. And Rudy Gobert still in prime of his career, the tail end of his prime, especially for big men who tend to age faster than other positions, but still have, a prime Rudy Gobert right now, and Karl-Anthony Towns, who, if you're going to point to the one player they might potentially move, it would be him. But I feel like he acquitted himself well enough during the playoffs, had enough big moments for them, that you look around the league and you say to yourself, okay, so if you trade Karl-Anthony Towns, who are you going to get that's going to make your team better right now? Because you have a team that can contend right now. So that's the big question you have to ask yourself in any cat trade. So, and I don't know that there's a clear-cut answer out there for that.
How does the ownership stuff complicate or not complicate things? Because, they're going through this arbitration process. Don't know exactly how long that's going to take, but it feels like it will drag out for a while. And, Connolly's sitting there with, the opt-out stuff has been reported, but I think you and I have talked about it. That's less scary than it really sounds. How do you kind of suss out kind of the impact of all of those little pieces?
I think ownership, I don't know that it's going to have a huge impact on whether they're a tax team or not next season. You just get the feeling that, and they have said, Alex Rodriguez and Mark Lowry, that, if they were the ones in charge, like Mark Lowry's like, I got so much money in the bank right now, I'm ready to make this team a title winner. Now, we can only go based off of what they say. I'm well aware that there was an ESPN report back in April that was very curiously timed to make them look bad, and that they wouldn't go into the luxury tax.
Right.
But it was, I don't think that report was necessarily telling the full story of what their plans for the team were and what, a budget might look like under a Lowry Rodriguez ownership. But the fact remains, this is probably not going to get resolved in the next few weeks here, and Glenn Taylor is going to still be the controlling owner of the team when they have to put the pieces in place for the roster next season here. All indications are that Glenn, is wanting to get a title, right? This is the best team he's had in his ownership tenure.
Yeah.
And it's one of the reasons why he's hanging on to the team, as he has said in multiple interviews. So I just don't see a world where, if Glenn Taylor's the one calling the shots here and cutting the check, I just don't see a world where he is going to cut down the team that he has, really enjoyed watching, the best team, best chance he has to win a title in his tenure here. And if the franchise value is really going up, almost exponentially over the last few years here, you have money to spare then on that asset, right? I would assume. Yeah. Right.
I would think so. Yeah.
If you claim that you're hanging on to the Timberwolves because the team is really good and it's appreciating in value, then you would look really disingenuous if you didn't want to pay the luxury tax bill to keep a very competitive and title contending team together in the same breath. And I think that would be a huge hit to his public image if he wasn't willing to do that.
I love to second guess or first guess and play devil's advocate. Play this out with me for a minute, if you would. Say the Wolves would have been the 4 seed instead of the 3 seed, or say Dallas had become the 6 seed instead of the 5 seed, and they meet in the first round of the playoffs, and this series we just watched more or less plays out in the first round and not the conference finals. How differently are we thinking about this team right now and the possibilities of the offseason right now?
Well, it's a good question, right? It's a very good question. I think, one, the Wolves look different in a first-round series as opposed to a third-round series.
That's
because
fair.
By their own accounts, they were gassed.
Good point.
Coming into the third round. So you'd have a different Wolves team facing a Mavericks team in the first round. But to your point, if they got eliminated in the first round, but I think some of that would depend on, does Dallas then go on to the NBA championship?
Right.
Because I think that has to factor into your evaluation. I think it factored into the evaluation last year that the Wolves played Denver, and then Denver went on to win the NBA title.
Yep.
You lost in the first round, yes, but you lost to the team that won the NBA championship, and you played them fairly competitively throughout the whole process of 5-game series. So I think that would factor into it a little bit. Um, I ultimately I don't know, but the fact is we're not living in that world. We're living in a
No.
world where they were in the Western Conference Finals, and they did beat Denver,
Yeah.
and they did beat Phoenix, and they were close in a lot of these games with Dallas, and late game execution down the stretch, especially those first 2 games, is what cost them. So maybe it is a different evaluation, but we are in a world where I thought at the beginning of last season, when we were talking about all these salary cap issues and luxury tax issues, and are they going to trade Carl and this and that, I said, well, what if this team goes on and makes it to the conference finals, right? You're going to want to run it back.
Yeah.
Because you're a title contender, and that's where we find ourselves right now. This team feels like it should run it back for one more year and see what comes up.
Ant obviously took another step this season, second team all NBA. He was huge in their first 2 series for sure, and then ran into some roadblocks with Dallas. But what's the next gear for him, or what should, if you're Anthony Edwards, what are you working on this off season, or is it simply getting a year older, kind of soaking in the lessons from the Dallas series, or do you feel like there are like elements of his game that he can grow specifically if he works on some things, after he takes a little downtime, like you are going to take some downtime?
Oh, he's not going to be taking much downtime because the Olympics are right around the corner here for him. So his off season is going to be very short. And I think we've heard stories too about like how young guys being in the Olympic Games can have an effect on like the trajectory of their career and how they attack the off season and their work habits and this and that. So, being around like Steph and LeBron and KD and Kawhi Leonard for 6 weeks or 2 months, however long this process takes.
Yeah, good point.
I think, might affect how Anthony Edwards attacks the rest of his summer once the Olympics are over. So I think that's to be determined right now. But, just watching that Dallas series, it is getting a year smarter. It is learning what you need to do to be able to compete at that level deep into the playoffs. I think then one of the next steps for Ant is I think watching Kyrie and Luka just kind of throw these floaters up to Derek Lively and Daniel Gafford. How can you not say to yourself, man, if I can add that to my game and perfect like a floater lob game, like that could be a huge next step for him. And outside of that, we'll see kind of what he wants to add physically and skill wise. He's always done that. Last season it was kind of the mid-range game, bank shot game, post-up game that he was really working on most of last season or last off season. I just think that watching that Dallas series, I wonder if he's watching all those lobs go by and think, man, what if I could do that?
I think that's a great point, because I feel like that's the area that I would be focusing on too, or instructing him to focus on, because it does feel a little bit sometimes, even though he's added that mid-range, that unless he's shooting like a 3 or getting all the way to the rim, he can get a little stuck. Like he's got 2 gears, and they're really good gears, but when Dallas plays him a certain way, he doesn't really have an answer if the double team gets to him in a certain way. So if he can kind of get that in-between game where he can hit those kind of 8 to 10 foot floaters, or if the help comes too far, throw up the lobs to Gobert, whoever is down there in that spot, that would unlock some things that they just didn't have available to them in the playoffs.
Yeah, 100%. And like you said, it kind of makes the defense be a little more honest.
Yeah,
being able to use Rudy more effectively will make the defense honest on him or honest on Rudy, instead of just, they know Ant's not likely to throw it to Rudy, so therefore they don't really have to respect the lob threat or the rolling dunk threat, right?
Yep.
When any other player has the ball, if it's Carl or if it's Mike Conley, opposing defenses have to respect the the roll threat, the lob threat, because those guys can throw it to him. But with Ant, it's just kind of like almost like a black hole in some ways of Rudy's effectiveness on that end of the floor out once he sets the screen.
How do you think they address backup point guard in the offseason? Because obviously they re-signed Conley, and he had a really good year, and fought through that injury in the playoffs and was still, I thought, pretty effective against Dallas. If maybe a little bit, I don't know how much that affected him, but like he's clearly still got game. Definitely loved on that team. Like ever since he got here, he's just been kind of this guy that provides a certain amount of maturity and stability and just kind of a perfect fit. But like he's had injury questions in the past. He was pretty durable this year. He not getting any younger. How do you think that kind of gracefully turn over that position eventually, but kind of more near term than anything else?
It's a good question, and one of the big questions going into the off season here. I wonder if do they try to bring Monte Morris back on a very friendly deal? After it didn't quite maybe pan out as well as they had hoped after making that move at the deadline, but you try to give him another year here, especially if you can sign him for cheap. Do they? Jordan McLaughlin, same thing, free agent, could come back on the cheap. That's kind of where the questions lie when it comes to free agency. Or do you try to go out and find somebody else? The way they tried with Shake Milton last offseason.
Right.
There's a name we haven't said.
I almost forgot about Shake Milton. Wow. Yeah.
I think ideally they were hoping that Shake Milton was going to pan out and be like a combo, kind of a combo guard, backup point guard, for this coming season as well. But it just didn't quite work out that way stylistically. So I don't know. That's going to be, one of the big questions is injecting a backup point guard and just more scoring somewhere in the mix here this offseason. And we'll see kind of what resources they have to do that, and the exceptions, and do they trade a young player to bring somebody in?
Yeah.
Kind of what are their options in terms of trying to figure that part out right now. And I think there's some things they can do, but we'll see what avenues they choose.
It's interesting too, because they seem like they have some young guys that could be kind of knocking on the door for minutes, but this year's team, was relatively healthy. They had things here and there, but it never really felt like they were down to like 6 guys in the rotation, things like that, where a lot of other guys had to play. I mean, had some Luka Garza minutes in meaningful spots on occasion, but like most of it was kind of the core was there. But you got Kyle Anderson as a free agent, and it seems hard to imagine how he comes back. You've got guys like Leonard Miller, Josh Minot, like Luka Garza. Who in that kind of group would you imagine they might think, okay, we don't need to use mid-level exception or whatever it is on a veteran. Somebody else is ready to be a rotation player on the cheap that's already on our roster.
Well, yeah, that's kind of it. It's how does Tim Connolly kind of view that? I know that obviously they're very high on Garza because they converted him to an NBA contract in the season. They love his game and work ethic. And obviously they have a lot, high hopes for Josh Minot, Leonard Miller when it comes to their development and stealing as prospects. So and we'll see kind of where Wendell Moore kind of figures in. You kind of think maybe is he possibly in the mix, for a backup point guard slot, somebody who can also defend a little bit as well. And then Jalen Clark, who's still coming back off the Achilles, probably is a little bit ways away still yet when it comes to actual NBA minutes, but we'll see. But yeah, when it comes to, I think Miller, Minot, and Garza are the ones you want to keep your eye on, and just what they might be able to bring to the table. But at the same time, I think if those guys get more minutes or are a part of the rotation next year, I don't think that necessarily solves the issues we were just talking about, which is like more of a reliable scorer, more of a backup point guard. I think you're still going to need to find that with what those guys bring to the table, which is more of like obviously guards as a 5. And, Miller, Minot are not ball handlers.
No.
And, they're probably not going to be lighting it up too much on the scoreboard for you. You need, I think, more pure scoring and point guard ability still on this roster.
Yeah, I agree. I feel like if you're really locking in on one thing that would take some of the pressure off of the starters, especially Anthony Edwards, it's someone who can really score from the perimeter on that second unit. I just don't know if they have that. Obviously, they had the 6th man of the year, and he can score a lot. Like, it's not saying they don't have a good bench. It's just it's disproportionately weighted towards 3s, 4s, and 5s at this point.
Well, and that's where the Kyle Anderson slot comes into play. Like, Kyle Anderson is not a scorer.
No,
he's a facilitator and playmaker on offense. So, if assuming Kyle Anderson, they can't find a way to bring him back, which is kind of likely given the salary and the luxury tax, do they find somebody who's just more of a bucket getter, pure scorer with that 8th slot and just roll the dice on that kind of a player? That's what I think were hoping for out of Monte Morris when he came in here. And that's why I say, do they just bring him back and hope that, an off season, he was dealing with some injuries earlier this season. And you hope that, maybe just like an off season where he's healthy, he's able to maybe recapture some of what he had when he was in Denver under Tim Connolly. You could see a scenario where that happens, right? Yep. But at the same time, you also have to, maybe get some other options in there in case that doesn't work out.
Fascinating off season coming up. They're definitely in a much stronger position.
But it's an off season on the margin. It's an off season on, and I think it's going to be much like last off season was, where they chose to run it all back. Yeah, coming into the off season, and the big moves that they made were to re-sign Nikhil. And they brought in Troy Brown and Shake Milton, and that was basically their off season last year. I think it's going to be kind of similar this year, where it's not going to be splashy moves. Barring a seismic trade of like pounds, right? Like, which is likely not to happen. It's just going to be It's going to be moves on the margins this year.
But this year, I mean, they won 14 more games. I mean, they are definitely more. The off season is just different. It might look the same in terms of the moves they make, but just in terms of organizational position, they're way ahead of where they were a year ago. They were kind of taking a leap of faith to run it back last year, and it requires far less of a leap this year.
I agree 100%. And when you have young players that are like Naz Reid and Jaden McDaniels and Anthony Edwards, and even Nikhil Alexander-Walker to a certain extent, who are young players really getting a taste of the deep playoffs for the first time. I think just internal improvement can be the way you get better. So, I think that's very much on their minds as they approach this offseason.
Well, we'll see where it's all headed. I'm sure I'll tap you on the shoulder in a few weeks, but not before then. Enjoy some well-earned time off, Chris Hine, and we'll talk to you soon.
Appreciate you, Mike. Thank you.
Thank you.
Great stuff from Chris. As usual, appreciate him hopping on with me one more time. Hope he sincerely enjoys his time off and gets kind of some rest. It's been a long season, longer. The Wolves played deeper than we're used to them playing, and everybody had to cover them. Chris, more than anybody else, had to cover them longer than we're used to covering them. So kudos to him for a job very well done, and hope he gets a little time off. Although the cooler here will tell you that there is still news percolating with the Timberwolves. Micah Nori, reportedly a candidate for the Cleveland Cavaliers head coaching vacancy. Micah Nori, a top Wolves assistant. He was on the sidelines kind of acting as, not acting as the head coach, but kind of being the person pacing the sidelines with Chris Finch sidelined for the Denver series and the Dallas series after that knee injury suffered at the end of the Phoenix series. So Micah Nori gained a lot of visibility in the last month or so. He is a candidate in Cleveland. That'd be a loss for the Wolves if he ends up getting hired there, although he is certainly deserving of an interview and deserving of that opportunity. So we'll see where that all goes from here. That will do it for me today. Plenty of great stuff coming up the rest of the week. Until then, I am Michael Rand. Enjoy your Tuesday. Back at it again tomorrow.